Elena Winters had always known exactly who she was. She was the responsible one, the planner, the woman who had her life mapped out in careful 5-year increments. At 35, she checked all the boxes she'd drawn for herself in her college journal. Successful career as an architectural designer at a prestigious firm, a charming craftsman home in a neighborhood with good schools, and a marriage of 12 years to David, her college sweetheart. The morning that would change everything began like any other Tuesday in September. Seattle's familiar drizzle tapped against the kitchen window as Elena prepared breakfast, the radio murmuring weather forecasts and traffic reports. She glanced at the clock and called upstairs. "Sophie, bus in 15 minutes. Their daughter appeared moments later, her 11-year-old frame drowning in an oversized sweatshirt, dark curls wild from sleep. "Mom, I need $20 for the field trip on Friday, and you have to sign this permission slip." Sophie slid a crumpled paper across the counter as she dropped onto a stool. Elena smoothed the form with one hand while flipping a pancake with the other. "You know, it would help if you didn't wait until the last minute to tell me these things." "Sorry," Sophie mumbled through a mouthful of toast. "Dad already said he'd give me the money." "Did he now?" Elena smiled despite herself. David was always the soft touch, the one who said yes before considering logistics. It balanced her cautious nature. This gentle push and pull they'd perfected over the years. The front door opened and closed, bringing with it the smell of rain and coffee. David appeared in the kitchen, his dark hair damp and his eyes bright. He kissed Sophie on the head, then moved to Elena, his lips brushing her cheek. "Morning, loves," he said, setting a cardboard tray of coffee cups on the counter. "Thought we could all use a pick-me-up. It's nasty out there." "You're the best," Elena said, accepting the cup gratefully. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Late night again?" David nodded. "The Richardson project is killing me. I was at the office until midnight redoing the renderings." He worked at a different architectural firm across town, a friendly professional rivalry they both enjoyed. "Well, don't forget we have dinner with my parents on Friday," Elena reminded him. Something flickered across David's face, so brief she almost missed it. A shadow of hesitation. "Right," he said, checking his watch. "I need to shower. Big client meeting this morning." Elena watched him go, a strange uneasiness settling in her chest. Later she would remember this moment, this ordinary Tuesday morning, as the last moments of her old life. The day passed in a blur of meetings and design reviews. Elena was presenting concepts for a new library when her phone vibrated repeatedly in her pocket. 3 missed calls from David in the span of 5 minutes. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. "David? What's wrong?" His voice sounded strange, tight. "Can you come home? Now?" "Now? I'm in the middle of a presentation." "Is it Sophie?" "Sophie's fine. She's at school." A long pause. "Please, Elena. I need to talk to you and it can't wait." The drive home was surreal. The rain had intensified, sheets of it washing across her windshield as traffic crawled along the interstate. She tried calling David twice more, but he didn't answer. By the time she pulled into their driveway, her imagination had conjured a dozen catastrophes. She found him in their living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He looked up when she entered, his face haggard. "What's going on?" Elena asked, dropping her bag and keys on the entry table. "You're scaring me." David stood, ran his hands through his hair. "I don't know how to say this." "Just say it, David." He met her eyes and in that moment she knew. Before the words even left his mouth, she knew. "I've been having an affair." The room seemed to tilt. Elena grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "It's been going on for a while," he continued, his voice hollow. 6 months. 6 months, she repeated. The words felt foreign on her tongue. "Her name is Claire. She works in marketing at my firm." Elena struggled to breathe. "Do you love her?" David flinched. "Elena, do you love her?" Her voice was steel now. "Yes." The word hung between them like a physical thing. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You're sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. And now? And now what?" David looked at the floor. "Claire is pregnant." The world stopped. Elena felt as though she'd been submerged in ice water, every sensation muffled and distant. I wanted you to hear it from me, he said. Before things get complicated. Complicated, she echoed. That's what you call this. She turned away from him, faced the window where rain streamed down the glass in rivulets. Behind her, David continued talking. Something about arrangements, about telling Sophie, about hoping they could be civil. But Elena wasn't listening anymore. She was watching the rain and thinking about the color blue. Blue like the nursery they had painted when she was pregnant with Sophie. Blue like the tiny socks she had folded and placed in a drawer. Blue like the walls of the second bedroom they had prepared 3 years later, before the first miscarriage. And then the second. And then the third. Blue like the grief she had carried silently, year after year, as doctors explained about her hostile womb, about incompatible genetic factors, about how Sophie had been a miracle that would not repeat itself. Blue like the ocean of sadness David had tried to help her swim through, until eventually, they had stopped talking about it altogether. Elena! David's voice broke through her thoughts. Did you hear what I said? She turned to face the stranger who was her husband. I heard you. I'll pack some things. His eyes were wet. I'll be staying at Claire's for now. Elena felt oddly calm as she watched him climb the stairs. The planner in her was already organizing, categorizing, attempting to make sense of chaos. She would need a lawyer. She would need to talk to Sophie. She would need to call her parents. When David came back downstairs with a duffel bag, she was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. I'll pick up Sophie from her friend's house after school, he said, hovering in the doorway. I think we should tell her together. Elena nodded, unable to speak. I really am sorry, he whispered. After he left, she sat in the silence of their home, her home now, and listened to the rain. For the first time in her meticulously planned life, Elena Winters had no idea what came next. The weeks that followed moved in strange rhythms. Some days stretched endlessly, each minute a small eternity of pain. Others vanished in a blink, lost to the fog of shock and grief. Sophie took the news badly as expected. She alternated between sullen silence and explosive anger, refusing to stay at her father's new apartment, and then, a week later, refusing to come home to Elena. School became a battleground of missed assignments and visits to the counselor's office. She needs time, Elena's mother advised over the phone. You both do. But time was the one thing Elena couldn't seem to grasp. It slipped through her fingers like water, leaving her disoriented. Had it really been a month since David left? 6 weeks. The date on her phone said November, but she was still stuck in that rainy September afternoon. Work became her refuge. She threw herself into projects, staying late at the office, bringing drawings home to review at the kitchen table long after Sophie had gone to bed. Her colleagues tip-topped around her, their sympathy evident but mercifully unexpressed. It was during one of these late nights at the office that she found herself alone with Marcus Chun, one of the senior partners. He appeared in her doorway around 9, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms inked with intricate geometric tattoos. You're burning the midnight oil again. Winters, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Elena looked up from her computer. Just finishing some revisions on the library design. The same revisions you were working on yesterday, and the day before that? His tone was gentle, not accusatory. She sighed. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who recognizes the signs. Marcus entered her office and sat in the chair across from her desk. I did the same thing when my wife left. Worked until I couldn't think anymore. Elena had forgotten about Marcus's divorce 3 years earlier. It had been the subject of office gossip for weeks. His wife had moved to Chicago for a job opportunity, and he had chosen to stay in Seattle. How did you get through it? She asked. Marcus smiled ruefully. Poorly at first. Then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. The only way out is through. Meaning you can work yourself to death trying to avoid the pain, but eventually you have to face it, feel it, let it do its worst. Elena looked down at her hands. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Nobody does, Marcus said. That's what makes it so damn hard. He stood to leave, then paused. We're launching that community center project in Portland next month. It's a good one. Adaptive reuse of an old factory space, Lots of sustainable elements. I was thinking you might want to take lead on it. Elena blinked in surprise. Me? But that's a major project. And you're a major talent, Marcus replied. Plus, a change of scenery might do you good. It would mean some travel, maybe a few days at a time in Portland to oversee things. The old Elena would have immediately calculated the logistical challenges. Sophie's schedule, David's availability, the careful balance of their shared life. But that life no longer existed. I'll think about it, she promised. That night, she arrived home to find Sophie waiting up for her. Curled on the living room sofa in pajamas, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. Hey, Elena said, dropping her keys in the bowl by the door. It's late. Why aren't you in bed? Sophie set her phone down. Dad called. Claire had her first ultrasound today. It's a boy. Elena's chest tightened. She moved slowly to the sofa and sat beside her daughter. How do you feel about that? Sophie picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. Weird. Dad sounded really happy. Like, more happy than I've heard him in forever. She looked up, her dark eyes, so like David's, searching Elena's face. Is that why he left us? Because he was unhappy. The question hit Elena like a physical blow. Oh, Sophie, no. Your dad didn't leave you. And whatever happened between us has nothing to do with you. But maybe if we'd been enough for him. Sophie's voice trailed off. Elena pulled her daughter into her arms, feeling the small body shake with silent sobs. Listen to me, she said fiercely. You are more than enough. You are everything. What happened between your dad and me is complicated, but it doesn't change how much we both love you. Later, after Sophie had finally gone to bed, Elena sat alone at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. A half-brother. Sophie would have a half-brother. Another piece of her carefully constructed life was shifting, morphing into something unrecognizable. She reached for her phone and called Marcus. I'll take the Portland project, she said when he answered. When do we start? Portland in December was a revelation. Where Seattle's rain was a constant, weary companion, Portland seemed somehow deliberate, arriving in dramatic bursts that cleared to reveal sharp winter sunlight and skies of startling blue. Elena arrived on a Monday, checked into a small boutique hotel near the project site, and spent her first day meeting with local contractors and community stakeholders. The community center was taking shape in an old textile factory, a cavernous brick space with soaring ceilings and walls of industrial windows. The bones are good, the lead contractor, Raj, told her as they walked through the space. But there's always surprises with these old buildings. He wasn't wrong. By Wednesday, they discovered asbestos in a section of ceiling and structural issues in the east wall that weren't in the original assessment. Elena found herself making rapid decisions, improvising solutions that somehow felt more intuitive than the careful planning she'd always relied on. You're good at this, Raj commented as they reviewed modified plans over lunch. Some architects fall apart when the perfect design meets real-world problems. Maybe I'm getting better at dealing with unexpected disasters, Elena replied with a wry smile. She called Sophie every night, relieved to hear her daughter sounding more like herself. David had taken her shopping for Christmas presents over the weekend, and they'd had dinner afterward without fighting, a small miracle. On Thursday evening, with her meetings finished early, Elena found herself at loose ends in an unfamiliar city. On impulse, she searched for local art galleries on her phone and found one hosting an opening reception that night. Why not? The old Elena might have returned to her hotel room with takeout and work files. The new Elena, whoever she was becoming, put on her coat and called a rideshare. The gallery was housed in a converted warehouse, its white walls illuminated by track lighting that highlighted vibrant, abstract canvases. Elena accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and moved slowly through the space, letting the colors wash over her. What do you think? A voice asked beside her. She turned to find a tall man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses studying the same painting she'd been lost in, a riot of blues and greens that somehow evoked both storm and calm. I think it's like looking at water, she replied, from above and below at the same time. He nodded, pleased. That's exactly what I was going for. Elena blinked. This is yours? You're the artist. He extended his hand. Thomas Garza. And yes, guilty as charged. Elena Winters. She shook his hand, feeling oddly flustered. Your work is. It makes me feel things I can't quite name. Thomas smiled. That's the highest compliment an artist can receive. He gestured around the gallery. Are you from Portland? Seattle, actually. I'm here for work. Just a few days. They moved to the next painting. A smaller canvas dominated by shades of amber and crimson. Elena found herself telling him about the community center project, about the challenges of adaptive reuse, about her love of spaces that held history. Thomas listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions. He was a professor at the local art college, he explained, and had lived in Portland for nearly 20 years after growing up in New Mexico. The light is different here, he said. It took me years to learn how to capture it. They talked until the gallery began to empty, the reception winding down. There was something easy about Thomas's company, an absence of expectation that Elena found refreshing. This has been lovely, she said as they stood outside the gallery under a clear night sky. Thank you for making a stranger feel welcome. You won't be a stranger if you come back, Thomas replied. He hesitated, then added, I'm having a small gathering at my studio on Saturday afternoon. Just a few friends, some food, some music. You'd be welcome to join us if you're still in town. Elena's instinct was to politely decline. She had planned to fly back to Seattle on Friday afternoon, to spend the weekend with Sophie. But David had texted earlier, asking if he could take Sophie to meet his parents, who were visiting from California. I'd like that, she found herself saying. Thank you. On Saturday, Elena discovered that Thomas's studio was actually a converted boathouse on the Willamette River. Its north wall almost entirely glass, affording a sweeping view of water and sky. The small gathering turned out to be a diverse group of artists, musicians, and academics who greeted her with genuine warmth. Thomas told us you're an architect, said a woman named Ivy, who created intricate paper sculptures. He's fascinated by the intersection of art and structure. Is he? Elena glanced across the room, where Thomas was deep in conversation with an elderly man. Ivy followed her gaze. He doesn't bring many people here. This is his sanctuary. The afternoon stretched into evening, and Elena found herself seated beside Thomas on a low sofa as he played guitar, his fingers moving deftly across the strings. The music was like his paintings, complex, evocative, stirring emotions she couldn't quite categorize. You're full of surprises, she said when he finished. Thomas smiled. Life's too short not to be multifaceted. Later, as the gathering dispersed, they stood at the edge of the dock behind his studio, watching the city lights reflect on the dark water. Tell me something real about you, Elena Winters, Thomas said softly. She looked at him, this man she barely knew. My husband left me 3 months ago, for another woman. She's having his baby, the child I couldn't give him. The words hung in the cold air between them. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, he finally said. For what? For trusting me with something real. Elena felt tears rise unexpectedly. She blinked them away, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. Don't apologize for honesty, Thomas said. He turned to face her fully. My wife died 6 years ago. Cancer. Some days I still reach for her when I wake up. Elena's breath caught. I'm so sorry. Me too, he said simply. For both of us. They stood in silence, two strangers connected by the strange intimacy of shared pain. When Thomas finally spoke again, his voice was gentle. Would you like to see my newest paintings? They're in the loft. No one's seen them yet. The loft was a small space above the main studio, accessible by a spiral staircase. Unlike the polished work displayed downstairs, these canvases were raw, unfinished, emotions in progress. One in particular caught Elena's eye. A figure standing in rain, not hunched against it but face upturned, arms outstretched. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's still missing something, Thomas said, standing close behind her. I've been working on it for months, but I can't figure out what it needs. Elena studied the painting. Maybe it's not about what's missing, she said slowly. Maybe it's about what's already there, waiting to be recognized. Thomas's eyes met hers. You might be right about that. When she returned to Seattle the next day, Elena carried with her Thomas's phone number and an invitation to return to Portland. both carefully tucked away like treasures she wasn't yet ready to examine. January brought a brittle cold to Seattle, the kind that squeezed under door frames and whispered through window cracks. Elena found herself making weekly trips to Portland for the community center project, which was now moving forward at a rapid pace despite the initial setbacks. She hadn't called Thomas, not immediately, but on her third trip, watching snow fall gently outside her hotel window, she reached for her phone. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me," he said when he answered. "I needed some time," Elena replied honestly. They met for coffee the next morning. A small cafe near the river where steam fogged the windows and the scent of baking bread filled the air. Thomas was wearing a faded blue sweater that matched his eyes, and Elena felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years. "How's your daughter handling everything?" he asked after they'd settled at a corner table. The question surprised her. Most men she knew would have steered clear of such complicated territory. "Some days are better than others," Elena said. "She has a lot of questions I don't have answers for." Thomas nodded. "Kids are remarkable that way. They cut straight to the heart of things." "Did you and your wife have children?"
No.
A shadow passed over his face. "We tried, but it wasn't in the cards for us. Irene had endometriosis." "I'm sorry," Elena said, recognizing the familiar echo of her own grief in his words. Thomas smiled softly. "Life has its own designs, doesn't it? Rarely the ones we sketch for ourselves." They fell into a pattern after that. Each time Elena came to Portland, they would meet, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dinner, once for a concert in a tiny jazz club where they sat so close their shoulders touched. They talked about art and architecture, about books and music, about the places they traveled and the places they still wanted to see. They rarely spoke directly about their losses, but the knowledge of them hummed between them, an unspoken understanding. Thomas never pressed for more than Elena was ready to give. He seemed content with her company, with the slow unfolding of whatever was growing between them. In Seattle, Elena found herself changing in small but significant ways. She cut her hair. The long, practical bob she'd worn for years gave way to a shorter, more playful style that framed her face. She painted the kitchen a warm terracotta that made the space glow in the winter light. She joined Sophie for late-night hot chocolate and talks about nothing in particular. "You seem different," Sophie observed one evening as they worked on a puzzle at the dining table. "Not sad all the time." Elena placed a piece carefully. "I'm trying to figure out who I am now, without your dad." Sophie considered this. "I like who you're becoming." February brought the first major crisis with the community center. A heavy rainstorm had revealed serious leaks in the roof, leaks that threatened both the timeline and the budget of the project. Elena found herself in an emergency meeting with the contractors and investors, all of whom looked to her for solutions. The old Elena would have panicked, would have retreated into rigid planning and risk assessment. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and walked them through alternative approaches, finding creative ways to address the issues without compromising the integrity of the design. By the end of the day, they had a new plan that everyone had bought into. "That was impressive," Raj told her afterward. "You turned a disaster into an opportunity." That night she called Thomas. "Can I see you?" He lived in a modest craftsman home in a quiet neighborhood, its front porch lined with potted plants that somehow thrived despite the winter cold. Inside, the space was warm and lived in. Bookshelves overflowing, art covering the walls, a record player spinning vinyl in the corner. "Welcome to my humble abode," Thomas said, taking her coat. Elena moved through the room slowly, absorbing details. Photographs of Thomas with a woman she assumed was Irene. Collections of smooth river stones arranged on windowsills. Sketchbooks stacked on every surface. In the kitchen, a pot of something fragrant simmered on the stove. "I hope you're hungry," Thomas said. "I make a mean vegetable curry." They ate at a small table, by a window that looked out onto a garden dormant for winter. Thomas poured wine and told her stories about his students, about the time he spent a summer in Japan studying traditional ink painting, about the stray cat that had adopted him 3 years ago. "Where is this mysterious cat now?" Elena asked, looking around. "Juniper is extremely selective about who she graces with her presence," Thomas replied with a smile. "She's probably watching us from some hidden vantage point, judging our conversation." After dinner, They moved to the living room where a fire crackled in a small wood stove. Thomas put on a record, something soft and bluesy, and they sat side by side on an old leather sofa that sighed under their weight. "I've been thinking about us," Elena said quietly. Thomas turned to look at her, his expression open. "What about us? I don't know what this is exactly, and I don't know if I'm ready for whatever it might become." "What are you afraid of?" he asked gently. Elena looked down at her hands. "Everything. Trusting again. Being vulnerable. Making another mistake. Or maybe you're afraid of being right," Thomas suggested. "Of discovering that life can start again in ways you never imagined." He reached out slowly and took her hand, his fingers warm and sure against hers. "I'm not asking for promises, Elena. Just presence. Just now." She looked up to find his face close to hers, his eyes questioning. When their lips met, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Later, lying beside him in his bed, watching moonlight spill across the ceiling, Elena felt a peculiar sense of peace. Thomas slept beside her, one arm draped lightly across her waist, his breathing deep and steady. She thought about David, about the life they had built and lost. She thought about the child growing inside Claire, the brother Sophie would soon have. She thought about all the plans she had made that had crumbled like sandcastles at the tide's edge. And yet, here she was, following a path she never could have charted, finding beauty in the unknown. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange exhilaration, as if she were standing on the edge of something vast and wonderful. She turned toward Thomas, curling into the warmth of him, and let herself drift into dreamless sleep. Spring arrived suddenly in Seattle, as if the city had grown tired of winter's grayscale palette and decided to paint itself in vivid greens and pinks overnight. Cherry blossoms exploded in the parks, and daffodils pushed their way through the soil in Elena's small garden. The community center in Portland was nearing completion, a transformation from abandoned factory to vibrant public space that had garnered attention from architectural magazines and local media. Elena found herself giving interviews, explaining her vision for a building that honored its industrial past while embracing a community-focused future. "It's your best work," Marcus told her after walking through the space with her. "We've already had inquiries from other cities interested in similar adaptive reuse projects." Her personal life had undergone its own transformation. Thomas had become a regular presence, driving up to Seattle on weekends when Elena wasn't in Portland. Sophie had been wary at first, another change in a year of too many changes, but had gradually warmed to him, especially after he helped her with an art project for school that earned her highest marks. "He's not trying to be my dad," Sophie told Elena one night as they folded laundry together. "I like that about him." David and Claire had married in a small ceremony in February, and Claire's pregnancy had progressed without complications. The baby, whom they had decided to name James, was due in May. To Elena's surprise, the knowledge no longer felt like a knife between her ribs. It was simply a fact, a reality to be incorporated into their new normal. "You've changed," David said to her during one of their now civil exchanges when he dropped Sophie off. "You seem lighter somehow." Elena nodded. "I am." It was true. The weight of expectation, of needing to be perfect, to follow the plan, to control every variable, had lifted. In its place was a newfound freedom, a willingness to embrace uncertainty. She and Thomas had settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. They talked every day, sharing the small details of their lives. When together, they explored, hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, discovering hidden bookstores, trying new restaurants, visiting galleries. In bed, they found a connection that surprised them both with its intensity and tenderness. But they were careful not to rush, not to force definitions or commitments. Thomas had his life in Portland, his teaching position, his community of fellow artists. Elena had Sophie, her expanding role at the firm, her home in Seattle. "We'll figure it out," Thomas said when the subject arose. "One day at a time." In April, Elena received a call from David that changed everything again. "Claire's water broke," he said, his voice tight with panic. "The baby's coming early. We're at the hospital. Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" Elena asked, surprised by her genuine concern. "They don't know yet. The doctors are worried about his lungs. He's only at 32 weeks. David sounded close to tears. Sophie's at a friend's house. Can you get her? I don't want to leave Claire. Of course. Text me the hospital details. I'll bring Sophie there as soon as I pick her up. The next hours passed in a blur. Elena found herself in a hospital waiting room with Sophie, who alternated between excitement about meeting her brother and anxiety about his premature arrival. Will he be okay? She asked, her face pale. The doctors here are very good, Elena said, putting an arm around her daughter. They take special care of babies who arrive early. David appeared occasionally to give updates. Claire was doing well. The baby was in distress but stable. They were monitoring his oxygen levels closely. Each time, he looked more haggard, more afraid. During one of these updates, he pulled Elena aside. Thank you, he said quietly, for being here, for bringing Sophie, for not hating me enough to turn your back on this. Elena studied her ex-husband's face. The lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. Gray threaded through his dark hair that hadn't been there before. We're still family, she said simply. Just a different shape now. When little James finally arrived in the early hours of the morning, tiny and red and fighting with every breath, Elena found herself standing outside the NICU window beside Sophie, watching as David and Claire hovered near the incubator. He's so small, Sophie whispered. But strong, Elena assured her. Like his big sister. They stayed at the hospital through the night and into the next day. Elena called Marcus to let him know she wouldn't be in, called Sophie's school to explain her absence, called Thomas to share the news. How are you holding up? Thomas asked. Strangely, I'm okay, Elena replied, surprised to find it was true. A year ago, this would have destroyed me all over again. Now it just feels like life. Messy and unexpected and beautiful in its own way. On the third day, when James's condition had stabilized enough for visitors beyond his parents, Elena stood beside Claire's hospital bed, looking down at the tiny infant in her arms. Would you like to hold him? Claire asked hesitantly. Elena nodded, unable to speak. Claire carefully transferred the small bundle, showing Elena how to support his head, how to navigate the monitoring wires. James weighed just over 4 pounds, his skin translucent, dark hair David's hair, covering his head. As Elena cradled him, he opened his eyes, blue as all newborns are, but with a directness that took her breath away. Hello, James, she whispered. Elena. We're connected now, you and I. Something shifted in that moment, a final letting go of what might have been, a full embracing of what was. This child would be part of Sophie's life, which meant he would be part of Elena's life too. Not in the way she had once dreamed, but in a new way that felt right, even in its strangeness. When Thomas arrived in Seattle that weekend as planned, Elena took him to the hospital to meet James, who was growing stronger each day. He's beautiful, Thomas said as they stood outside the NICU afterward. He took Elena's hand. And so are you, for opening your heart to this complicated love. Elena looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life when she least expected it, who had shown her that new beginnings could arise from endings. I have something to tell you, she said. Marcus offered me a promotion. Director of Sustainable Design for the firm. Thomas's face lit up. Elena, that's fantastic. Congratulations. It would mean less travel, she continued. More overseeing, less hands-on work. And she took a deep breath. They're opening a small satellite office in Portland. Marcus asked if I'd be interested in running it. Thomas went very still. Are you? I'm interested in many things in Portland, she replied, her heart racing. The question is, would it be too much? Too soon? Too complicated? Thomas cupped her face in his hands. Life is complicated, Elena. That's what makes it worth living. He kissed her then, in the sterile hospital hallway with its harsh fluorescent lighting and antiseptic smell. A kiss full of promise and possibility. Is that a yes? Elena asked when they pulled apart. Thomas smiled. That's a let's figure it out together. That night, back at her house, with Sophie sleeping soundly and Thomas reading beside her in bed, Elena found herself thinking about colors. Not just blue, the color of grief and loss that had dominated her vision for so long, but all the colors that made up a life fully lived. The deep red of passion, the soft yellow of friendship, the steady green of growth. the vibrant orange of creativity, the rich purple of wisdom, and yes, the blue of sadness too, because no life was complete without it. She thought of the painting in Thomas's loft, the figure standing in the rain with face upturned and arms outstretched. She understood now what it was waiting for. Not for the rain to stop, but for the recognition that rain itself was part of the beauty, part of the wholeness. Thomas set his book aside and looked at her. "What are you thinking about with that smile on your face?" Elena leaned over and kissed him softly. "I'm thinking about the color of rain, and how it contains every color if you know how to see it." Epilogue. After the rain. 1 year later, Elena stood on the rooftop garden of the Portland Community Center, watching as children played among raised beds of vegetables and flowers. Below, the renovated space hummed with activity, art classes, job training workshops, community meetings. The project had won several design awards and had become a template for similar initiatives in other cities. More importantly, it had become a vibrant part of the neighborhood, a place where people of all ages and backgrounds gathered and connected. Elena felt a hand slip into hers and turned to find Thomas beside her, his face tanned from their weekend hikes, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "Quite a view," he said, looking out over the city where the afternoon sun broke through clouds, casting patches of golden light across buildings and parks. "It turned out even better than I imagined," Elena replied, leaning into his warmth. Life had found a new rhythm, unexpected but somehow right. She'd taken the position in Portland, working 3 days a week at the satellite office while splitting her time between the two cities. Sophie stayed with David when Elena was in Portland, an arrangement that had been rocky at first but had settled into something workable. The small craftsman house Thomas owned now held traces of Elena. Her books mingled with his on shelves, her favorite mug in the cabinet, her clothes in half the closet. She kept her Seattle home, unwilling to uproot Sophie completely, creating instead a life that flowed between places and people in a way she never would have planned but now couldn't imagine otherwise. "Mom!" Sophie's voice called from behind them. Elena turned to see her daughter emerging from the stairwell, followed by David, Claire, and little James, now a sturdy toddler with dark curls and a determined waddle. "Sorry we're late," David said. "Someone needed a diaper change right as we were leaving." Elena smiled as James broke free from Claire's hand and made a beeline for her, arms outstretched. She scooped him up, breathing in his sweet baby shampoo scent. "Lena!" he exclaimed, his version of her name that made her heart melt every time. "Hey buddy," she said, kissing his forehead. "Ready to see the butterflies?" The community center's butterfly garden had been Thomas's contribution to the project, an educational space where children could learn about native pollinators. Today was its official opening, and James had been talking about butterflies for weeks, according to Claire. "How was the drive up?" Thomas asked David, extending his hand. "Not bad," David replied, shaking it with genuine warmth. "Claire's parents are in town next weekend. They'd like to take Sophie to that new aquarium if that works with your schedule." Elena watched as the two men in her life, past and present, discussed logistics with an ease that still sometimes surprised her. There had been awkwardness at first, jealousy and tension that bubbled up in unexpected moments. But time had softened the edges, and a shared commitment to Sophie's well-being had forged a tentative friendship. "Thomas finished a new painting," Sophie announced, sliding up next to Elena. At 13, she was all long limbs and strong opinions, her dark hair now streaked with a purple highlight that had been a compromise after much negotiation. "Did he now?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow at Thomas. He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "It wasn't supposed to be a secret. It's our family," Sophie continued. "All of us. Even Juniper." The cat had become an unexpected bridge between them, adopting Sophie with a devotion that had eased the transition of their blended lives. "I'd love to see it," Claire said, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat protecting her fair skin. Her relationship with Elena had evolved from cautious politeness to genuine respect, bonded by their shared experience of loving the complicated, flawed man who was David. "Tonight," Thomas promised. After dinner. The butterfly garden celebration was a success, children and adults alike delighting in the delicate creatures that fluttered among carefully selected plants. James squealed with joy when a monarch landed briefly on his shoulder, and Sophie gave an impromptu tour to some younger kids, showing off the knowledge she'd gained helping Thomas plan the space. Later, after David, Claire, and James had departed for their hotel, Elena, Thomas, and Sophie returned to the Craftsman house where Juniper greeted them with aristocratic indifference before demanding dinner. In Thomas's studio, set up now in what had once been a sunroom, the promised painting waited on an easel, covered with a cloth. "It's not quite finished," Thomas warned as they gathered around. "But it's close." He pulled away the cloth to reveal a canvas alive with color and movement. It depicted their unconventional family in Thomas's distinctive style, not realistic but capturing the essence of each person. Elena and Thomas stood at the center, Sophie slightly ahead of them, reaching back to hold both their hands. To one side, David and Claire sat on a bench, James between them. Juniper perched regally on a wall nearby. Behind them all was a sky in transition, storm clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of brilliant blue. "It's us," Sophie breathed, leaning closer to study the details. "It's us," Thomas agreed, his arm slipping around Elena's waist. Elena gazed at the painting, seeing in it all the pain and joy, all the endings and beginnings that had brought them to this moment. She saw the rain that had nearly drowned her and the colors that had saved her. "What will you call it?" she asked softly. Thomas smiled, his eyes meeting hers with a look of quiet understanding. "After the rain," he said simply. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the gentle patter of spring rain against the windows, Elena thought about the person she had been before, the planner, the controller, the woman who believed happiness came from following rules and checking boxes. She thought about the person she was now, still organized, still thoughtful, but open to the unplanned moments, the detours, the messy beauty of a life that refused to be neatly mapped. Thomas stirred beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured sleepily. Elena turned to him, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "I was thinking that sometimes you have to get completely soaked before you can appreciate the sun." He caught her hand and kissed her palm. "And sometimes the most beautiful landscapes come after the heaviest storms." Outside, the rain continued to fall, tapping against the roof like gentle music. Inside, Elena Winters closed her eyes and drifted to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever weather came next, she had learned not just to endure it, but to see its colors, to dance in its patterns, to find its unexpected gifts. She had learned, at last, to live in the moment between the raindrops and the rainbow.